Okay, class, we're back to the synovial joint. We talked about the ligaments that you would see which support the joint. Rich nerve supply, blood vessel supply, nerve fibers dictate pain, joint movement, stretch. Kinesiology. Where you are also, let's say, proprioception. Your position in space must be determined by how the joint is bent. So you have nerve fibers in there to determine where your position is. Think about it. If you're going to make the next step, how can you make it unless the brain is informed of what the previous step is, or the position of the footing. Nerve fibers detect pain in these joint areas. So if you get hit, joint areas is inflamed. Capillary blood vessels supply the ultrafiltrate, shall we say, going through the synovial membrane to get the synovial fluid. A bursa is a sac. It's a flattened sac with synovial membranes. It's lined with contains synovial fluid. This is some extra when you have a bursa. Let me show you. The kind of cushion. See, here's like, you've heard of bursitis, tennis elbow. In areas of high friction, you get these. You develop these bursa as a cushion bag, we'll call it. Okay, containing synovial fluid. Bursa rolls and lessens the friction. So there's not a lot of irritation between this bone and that. And you can see this right here. This ligament there. Contains synovial, commonly acts as a ball bearing. Okay. Go a little further, okay. Tendon sheath. Let's look at that. A tendon sheath wraps around, it's another synovial field that wraps around the tendon. Now that's part of what happens in your hand, because see, the muscles that are moving your fingers are really up in the forearm and the wrist, and then you have these tendons that go down to handle those particular, to move your fingers, shall I say? That's what I'm trying to say. And so, like with carpal tunnel, that has to do with things of this nature here, even though there's a different term for the carpal tunnel, but it still involves these tendon sheaths and associated structures we can look at. Okay. Stabilizing factors at a synovial joint. Shape of articular, let's go back here, just look at one. Shape of articular surfaces. See, a shape that has some degree of congruence, even though they're different shape. Ligaments and number of locations, limited role, ligaments. Muscle tone that keeps the joints. Okay, let me explain that. What keeps a joint tight is the associated muscles. What keeps a joint tight is the associated muscles. So when your muscles start getting weak, atrophied, you don't exercise or whatever, the joint is not as strong. Let me go to the scapula. Some individuals, you have supraspinous muscles and infraspinous muscles on the scapula. And as those muscles get weak, the scapula can wing out. My father had that when he got into his, I guess, late 70s, 80s. He would always have pain with that scapula because he wasn't exercising at all, of course, at that age. Nowadays, people exercise no matter how old they are. In the older days, they didn't, and that's just the way it was. But the muscles, your skeletal muscles, really keep your joints strong. So you want to keep those skeletal muscles exercised, and that gives strength to the joints. Gives very good strength to the joints. Okay. So, synovial joints, muscle attachments across the joint. origin, attachment to the, okay, this has to do with hooking the muscles. When you have a muscle, now there's actually a new way of describing this. This is the older way, but it still for most people holds. The origin, if you say that you have a muscle, you'd say like, what's the origin? The origin is at the most immovable bone. Now it may be movable, but it's the least movable. And the insertion is at the more mobile. So like you take your deltoid, your shoulder, at the shoulder area where the origin would be, at the bones there. At the humerus, which is more mobile, that would be where the insertion. Muscle contraction causes the insertion to move towards the origin. Okay? And we'll look at that when we do a few muscles. All right. So we go a little further here. So range of motion, non-axial, slipping movements only, uniaxial. And actually, before I get into that, I want to go here to some pictures that I want you to be familiar with. I want you to be able to identify, now these are gliding motions at the wrist, okay, but the key I want you to be able to know is flexion, extension, and hyperextension. Okay. Now I'm going to let's use our arm. Okay, so you got your arm. Okay, bend your arm at your elbow. That would be flexion. Take your arm and move it back down. That would be extension. If you could go past that point back at the elbow, that would be a hyperextension. So flexion then would be bending your elbow, raising your arm, okay, which would bring your forearm to your upper arm, and then dropping it down, that would be extension, and then going further back at that joint would be hyperextension. Here they're using the neck. All right. Here they're using this again, using the body. Okay. All right. They're using the shoulder. They're using this now, the leg, let's say for flexion. See, I'm bringing this up. An extension, I'm bringing it back down. And if I could bring it further, that would be hyperextension. Okay. This here is called circumduction. So what you're doing is you're taking your arm straight out and just making it in a circle. Okay. This here is abduction and adduction. Now this is how you could kind of think of the words. Add, A-D-D, to the body. If I bring my arm in, I'm adding to the body. If I take it out, I'm like abducting, like you abduct someone. Abduction, adduction. Let's do another one here. Okay, rotation. Turning the head around. See, if I do my leg and I turn it outward, that's a lateral rotation. But if I bring it inward and try to twist it, now the leg is still straight, so you're rotating it. You're not bending it, just like, then that would be a medial rotation. Okay. If you bring your palms up, that's supination, just like you were making them supine, laying them on a table or the bed. If you bring it down, turn your palms down, that's called pronation. With the foot, if you bring the foot up, that's called dorsiflexion. This is the dorsiflexion. Underneath your foot is the plantar surface. So if you pull it down, that's plantar flexion. So dorsiflexion, raise your foot up. Plantar flexion, drop it down. Right here is inversion. You're taking your foot inward. Eversion, outward. Turn the foot inward, inversion. Turn it outward, eversion. You see how that lady right there is protracting, sticking her chin out, and then bringing it back in, retraction of the mandible, lower jaw. Elevation, okay, using the mandible, raising the neck, but raising the mandible up. So you say elevate your mandible. That means really close your mouth in a way. Depression, come down. And this is opposition, where you're taking your fingers and putting them together. Okay? So the key I want you to really know is that flexion and extension, these particular things, circumduction, you know, rotating your arm. Okay? See, if you take your arm and you rotate it in a wide circle, that's circumduction. But if you keep your arm straight and you just turn your arm either inward or outward, see, that's rotation there. So circumduction is you making that wide thing. So in other words, here is circumduction, where you swing your arm. But if I just took my arm, held it straight, and turned it inward, but don't swing it, that would be rotation, because I'd be rotating right here. So that's the difference between circumduction and rotation. Okay. So kind of look at maybe other drawings of this. You know, it's easy to show you when you're in class to show you how this works. Okay. So now I'm going to close this video here, and we'll start another one, another brief one.